Eggs are one of my favorite ingredients and they are incredibly versatile. But when it comes to baking with eggs, there are several properties of them that you need to know to get to your best baked goods yet. I'm Erin Jeanne McDowell and here's everything you need to know about baking with eggs. One of the most common questions I'm asked about eggs is, does it matter if I use brown eggs or white eggs? And actually the color of the shell only has to do with the breed of chicken that it came from. So it doesn't do anything to affect the nutritional value, flavor, or the interior look of any of the eggs. So beyond the color of the shell, there are different sizes of eggs. And this is really important. What I have here are medium eggs, large eggs, extra large eggs, jumbo! The size of the egg is determined by its weight. So one of the reasons this is important is that if a recipe calls for, say, large eggs, and you only have extra large eggs in your house, you can still use those extra large eggs. You're just going to need to enlist the help of a kitchen scale. So of course, every recipe is going to be different, but as a recipe developer, I only develop recipes using large eggs. So a large egg is 2 ounces per egg. So if I wanted to replace a large egg with a jumbo or extra large egg, I would crack the extra large egg into a bowl. I'm gonna whisk it up because I wanna combine the egg yolk and the egg white, because you don't wanna just add by weight and only add the egg white when the recipe is calling for a whole large egg. So once I've combined it, then what we will do is we'll grab another bowl and we're gonna weigh out 2 ounces. And there we are. Proceed with your recipe using just the amount of a large egg. The safest way to store your eggs and keep them fresh for the longest period of time is in the refrigerator. But when you're baking, most recipes are gonna call for eggs at room temperature. If you forget to take your eggs out 30 minutes to an hour before you're making your recipe, there's an easy fix. I've got right here a bowl of warm water. And when I say warm, I mean it's just warm to the touch when I dip my finger in it. And I'm gonna add however many eggs I need for my recipe into the warm water and let them sit for a few minutes. The temperature of the water is going to kind of ambiently bring the whole egg to room temperature so that they are not cold when you add it into the mixer. If you do add cold eggs into a recipe that calls for room temperature eggs, you can risk breaking the mixture. So this is what a broken batter looks like. Yeah, and it can result in a really unfortunate textural issue and also a whole host of potential baking issues when this item gets to the oven. So by using ingredients that are all at the same temperature, you're gonna have more consistent baking results and you're gonna have the ideal texture of the batter or dough when you're mixing it. Inside each egg, there are 2 main components, the white and the yolk. And a lot of baking recipes are gonna have you separate them and only use the yolk, only use the white, or use them both but use them separately. And that's because the components of the egg yolk and white are composed very differently, and so sometimes they need to be treated differently in recipes to get that effect. You can see the difference between them when you crack the egg and separate it, and I'm gonna show you 2 different ways to separate. One is just using the shell. Just gently toss the yolk back and forth until all of the white comes out, and then you can put the yolk in its own bowl. The other way to separate an egg is a little bit more gentle. It's using your hand. Now, you can see on this egg yolk actually one of the other pieces of the egg. This is called the chalaza. This is a little twisted piece of membrane that attaches the yolk to the inside of the shell. It tends to stay with the whites when you separate eggs, so some recipes actually call for you to strain the egg whites, and this is why. This piece will never really fully go away. It's not a problem, it's totally edible, but if you're looking for something really silky smooth like a custard, they might suggest straining this out, that little membrane. The other part of an egg that is worth talking about is actually inside the shell. And it is this little pocket of air right here. Can you see that? Now that pocket of air is worth noting because the size of that pocket is going to change as the egg becomes less fresh. So when the egg is very fresh, that pocket of air is very small. When the egg becomes less fresh and it's been sitting for several weeks, that pocket of air is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. Let's talk a little bit about these separate pieces of the egg, the white and the yolk. The egg white is made up almost entirely of protein, and because of that, it has this incredible ability to whip up so hugely beyond its original volume, up to 8 times its original volume. Egg yolks, on the other hand, are made up almost entirely of fat. They do have a little bit of protein in there too, but they're the good stuff. The richness, the creaminess, that's coming from the egg yolk. What we're gonna do is we're gonna make a creme glaze. This is a really simple custard that really beautifully demonstrates exactly how you should manipulate egg yolks in a situation like this. We're gonna start by heating up some milk and cream, sugar and salt. I'm also gonna add a vanilla bean, and we're gonna bring that to a simmer. And what we're doing is we're starting the process by heating up the milk, because if we try to add the egg yolks directly into this pot, that more direct heat can risk scrambling the eggs, and we can actually end up with kind of a gritty, clumpy texture. So what we're gonna do is a process that's called tempering. Tempering is done to sort of bring the egg yolks closer to the temperature of the milk and cream, aka tempering. Then when we start mixing it, it will slowly thicken. If we thicken it too quickly, the proteins will coagulate, and that's what gives us that sort of scrambled egg, clumpier texture. We don't want that. We want to coagulate those proteins really, really slowly so that we end up with this silky, velvety texture. Once you've whisked in some of that hot liquid into the egg yolks, it's time to return them to the pan. You want your pot on really low heat when you do this, and you're gonna whisk constantly as you add, because again, we're trying to kind of gradually combine these two. And we wanna cook this until it coats the back of the spatula thickly, but not so much that it comes to a boil. The whites are truly amazing for their ability to capture air and increase in volume. The first thing that happens when you're whisking the eggs is if you start by whipping them at a slightly lower speed, that helps to loosen and break up some of those strands of protein. That is going to result in an even fuller, more voluminous meringue later. So that's the first step. After whipping your eggs for a little while, it's going to start to have large white bubbles on the surface, but the lower part of the mixer bowl is still going to look like egg whites. So now I'm going to raise the speed up. Now that I've loosened them up, they've gotten a little foamy, I'm going to raise it to high, and I'm going to start adding the sugar gradually. So now at this stage, we're going to whip our egg whites to the desired peak. Soft peak sort of falls over when you lift the beater out. Medium peak sort of holds its shape, but with a little bit of curve. And stiff peak holds its shape perfectly. Stiff peak. Once your egg whites have reached their appropriate volume, they can be used on their own. That can be a meringue, that can be a finishing element for pies, or it can even be the base of a recipe like meringue cookies. But it can also be used as a physical leavener in recipes like cakes, cookies, muffins, all sorts of stuff. The air bubbles that are trapped inside of the egg whites are going to linger and then become trapped inside of the batter or dough that you're mixing. A great example of this is angel food cake. I made this angel food cake using egg whites, and that is the only leavener in this recipe. There's no baking soda, no baking powder, it's just egg whites, and all that air that was trapped into there gives this cake its light, fluffy texture. So what role do whole eggs play in recipes? They can help create structure, they can help bind a recipe, they can affect the internal texture, creating a softer, more tender crumb structure, and of course they can also trap air, as in the creaming method that we were showing earlier. In that creaming method, I was making a recipe for chocolate chip cookies. And we've got those chocolate chip cookies in front of me now. I've got two versions, one made without any egg and one made with egg. This is the same recipe, and it's a great example of how the whole egg affects this recipe. Our cookies that are baked with eggs are very soft, very tender. They have a really beautiful structure and they just sort of fall apart. They've got that little bit of chew. All of that comes from the egg. Over here, on the other hand, we have our no egg cookies, and they are quite firm and are just a bit crumblier. You can see they don't have the same external texture. The whole batter didn't come together in the same way that the batter for our cookies with eggs did. And there you have it, everything you needed to know about baking with eggs.